busy. I buy a lot of cards, a lot of cards. Christmas cards, birthday cards, anniversary, congratulations, graduation, you name it, I buy them all. I just feel like I want people to know that I care. So when I stop by the card aisle, I always have to pick one up and send one to somebody I care about, which I didn't think was that bad until Tom pointed out that I've probably spent billions of dollars on the card industry at this point. I'm funding them for sure. So if you haven't taken stock in them, you might want to do that because I purchase a lot of cards. So I started thinking about this idea of cards. Why do we even buy them? Who came up with that idea of sending cards? And what you may not know about me, my undergraduate degree is in biology. I minored in chemistry. My graduate degree is in secondary education, and I taught public school for 13 years. I'm still alive, too. 13 years. I'm now working on my second master's at Lancaster Bible College. Now, the truth is, if I do not know something, I will find out. I am the research queen. Google's got nothing on me. I can research like nobody's business. So sure enough, Friday night, I got nothing else to do. I start researching this idea of cards, and here's what I found out. The very first cards were sent in the 1400s. Now, back in the 1400s, these would be handwritten, nicely drawn cards, and predominantly they were birthday cards. That's what they would send. Wasn't until 1843 that they branched out into another industry where they started sending Christmas cards. And still today, the most popular card is the birthday card, number one, and number two is the Christmas card. Now, 90% of households will purchase cards. 90%. That's market saturation. That market saturation is pretty high. However, 80% of cards are purchased by women. Now, there's only one holiday in the entire year where this changes, where men will go out en masse and buy cards. Any idea what that might be? You got it! Ding, ding, ding! Valentine's Day. Men feel obligated to go out and buy cards. Millennials, my favorite people, prefer e-cards. And they say that they're faster. Now, would you expect anything less from a generation of people who stand in front of the microwave screaming at it? Like, come on! 30 seconds! Right? But they actually have very sound reasoning for this. They are environmentally friendly. They're much more interactive, and they're much more personable. So I got to give it to millennials. I might have to switch over to e-cards after this. Overall, we buy about 7 billion cards annually. 7 billion cards. Now, none of that really explains why we buy cards, but fortunately, I still have Saturday night to research that, which I did. And here's what we found. I had to go back to find the time when the printing press was invented. Because when they invented the printing press, they would have had massive amounts of cards. At this point, they really have to establish a need for all these cards. So I started looking at the advertising campaigns that early cards used. And here's what I found. Initially, they were advertised as an expression of genuine concern without having to get involved. That is the worst advertising campaign ever. I think if I got a card back then, I would slap you. Like, really? You care, but you just don't want to get involved? That's terrible. And if that's the advertising campaign, imagine what the card would say. Happy birthday. Wanted you to know I cared. Just not that much, right? That would be the card. But amazingly enough, they were successful because people are busy. We want people to know we care. We just don't have the time to get involved. And it was only a matter of time until they branched into other markets, like the sympathy market. Now, the sympathy market started out as loss of a loved one, later went on to illness, divorce, loss of a job, you name it. And it was very, very successful. Turns out misery is a very popular time where people care, they just don't want to get involved. Turns out that sympathy really isn't the way we should be. But sure enough, we're busy people. By the year 2000, the card industry sold 125 million sympathy cards. That's a lot of cards. But do we really want to be sympathetic? Is that who we want to be as Christ followers? So to figure this out, I did a little research for you. The definition of sympathy, here we go, having feelings of pity or sorrow for someone else's misfortune. Now this really translates into, we care enough to feel bad for you. That's it. Truth is, cards actually help the sender more so than the receiver. Because we feel okay, we did something for them, but they don't really help out the person long term who's receiving them. And when you look at Scripture, we aren't taught to be sympathetic. Jesus showed us that we should be empathetic. So what's the difference between sympathy and empathy? Empathy, here's our definition. By the way, I looked it up. Actively seeking to understand the feelings of others. Trying to understand what other people are going through. So today what we're going to do is we're going to contrast both of these terms, sympathy and empathy. And we're going to do this so you can learn to connect to people in a much deeper, meaningful way. Now, even the secular world recognizes the difference between these two words. We're going to take a look at a clip by Dr. Brené Brown, who wrote, "Daring Greatly, How the Courage to Be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead." Check out this video. So what makes things better are connections. Now, Dr. Brené Brown is a professor in Texas, but as Christ followers, our ultimate teacher is God. And any good teacher provides a textbook, which we have here, the Bible. By the way, if you don't have one of our Bibles, we do give them away for free in the back. But a good teacher also provides an example. And Jesus served as our godly example, our example of how to live a good, godly life. So today, we're going to use the story of Lazarus, where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. But we're not going to focus on the miracle. What we're going to focus are the model that Jesus provided on how to have an empathetic relationship with people. Let's start out with our very first principle. Sympathy watches while empathy connects. Sympathy watches while empathy connects. And I think in the terms of watches, of like the rubberneckers. You know, when you see an accident and everybody kind of slows down and just watches. They're not connected to that person. They don't feel obligated to stop. They just watch. So in the story of Lazarus, we're going to pick this up at the end of John chapter 10. And by the way, this is on page 749 if you have one of the Bibles that we give out. We're going to stay on page 749. So for your convenience, we have this connection card right here, which we would like you to fill out, by the way, with your name, any information you feel comfortable giving us. The Today section is for you. If you need us to be praying for you for some reason today, we're more than happy to do that. Or if something just hits you in a way that you feel like sharing, please feel free to hand these out. But they are also going to serve as your bookmark because you can place them right in page 749, and we're going to hang out there. So at the end of chapter 10, Jesus is fleeing a city where the Jewish people tried to stone him. He barely escapes with his life. He crosses the Jordan, and he goes into an area where John the Baptist was previously preaching. So this group of people knew that he was coming. They expected him, they looked forward to seeing him, and his ministry really takes off there. He's changing lives every day. People are asking questions. He's bringing people to God every day. But while he's there, he hears that Lazarus is sick. Now we're going to be reading John chapter 10, verses 39 to 42, and John chapter 11, 1 to 3, and this is on page 749. Again, they tried to seize him, but he escaped their grasp. Then Jesus went back across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing in the early days. There he stayed, and many people came to him. They said, though John never performed a sign, all that John said about this man was true. And in that place, many people believed in Jesus. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Jesus knew Mary and Martha, and he knew Lazarus, and he connected them with them in a much deeper way than we connect with people today. His connection and concern for them made him hear the heart cries of those women. Now, here's what's important. He had every reason just to watch. Think about it. He only had 3 years to preach, to change the world, just 3 years. He finally goes to a place where people are listening. They're asking questions. He's bringing a lot of people to Christ every day. But he stops. He stops and he hears the heart cries of Mary and Martha because he is connected to them. He loves them. Now, most of the time, our connections today sound like this. Now that is dial-up. If you still have that, you need to return it back to the museum, okay? They want it back. But you get the idea. We have what you call virtual relationships. A lot of our relationships are online. We watch other people's lives, but we're not necessarily connected to them. Now, some of you who may not have Facebook are probably thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me. I don't have any virtual friendships. I'm sure you do. We all have those friends that we check in with once or twice a year. Hey, you good? Yep, I'm good. I'm good. You good? You good? I'm good. Awesome. We're good. We're friends, right? We all have those people that we have virtual relationships with. But we're not connecting. Connecting is a two-way link. Now, I'm not going to bust on Facebook because honestly, social media is a great place to start a connection, to start. But it's not where the ending needs to be. Not to mention, if you think about it on Facebook, most people will only post the best of the best. And those people who don't, who post the really sad, depressing stuff, it's kind of a little weird, isn't it? I mean, you're like, ugh, okay, not sure what to do with that. So we need to go deeper to connect with people. Here's your first bullet point. Great relationships aren't built in a day. They're built daily. Great relationships aren't built in a day. They are built daily. They require effort, intention. So to give you some clues on how to change a virtual relationship into a connection, think about this. A comment is better than a click. So if you're on Facebook, I am assuming that you are at least clicking the heart or the happy face or something. Because if you're just watching them, technically that's stalking and that's illegal. So I'm just assuming that you're clicking. But comments, leaving a comment is going to be much, much better than a click. Hey, I love those pictures of your vacation. Maybe we can chat sometime. That looks like a vacation I might be interested in. Now, a call is way better than a comment. Because when you pick up the phone and you call somebody, you are not limited in the characters that you can put on there. Now, maybe in Facebook you're not limited, but I think society kind of dictates that you can't leave giant paragraphs on Facebook. Ultimately, where you want to go, a conversation is better than a call. To pick up the phone is great, but to sit down with somebody and maybe have coffee or go work out together, anything like that is going to be way better because over 90% of communication is nonverbal. So if you're communicating through Facebook or phone calls only, you miss a lot of the conversation that could go on. So here's your next bullet point. Avoid the trap of virtual connections. Avoid the trap of virtual connections by going on a social media diet. You're probably thinking, there's no way, I don't have time to call people, go to lunch with all these people. Well, I think you'll find if you limit the time you spend on social media or with these virtual relationships, you will have more time to invest in people, to invest in the connections with one another. That brings us to principle number 2. Sympathy sends cards, while empathy shows up. Sympathy sends cards, empathy shows up. So we're going to go back to our story. And in the story, Jesus decrees that this sickness that Lazarus has is not going to touch him. he decides that he's going to have to go back. He is now going to go back to the same village that previously stoned him, Bethany in Judea. So he's going to go back to that. He needs to be there. He has to show up. This is John chapter 11, verse 4 to 8. By the way, we're on page 749, and if you used your bookmark, then you are right there. So when he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus. So when he heard Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" Jesus didn't send a card. He had every reason to send a card. I mean, technically they weren't invented yet, but he could have sent a hand note, right? A miracle in a card would be great, but he didn't do that. He showed up. He was willing to risk personal injury. Remember, he barely escaped this place with his life, but he's going back to be there for Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He was willing to risk extreme discomfort or even death to show up. How many excuses do we give for not showing up in other people's lives? I don't know what to say. I'm not really sure what I could do. I'm sure there's plenty of people there anyway. Or I would just be in the way. Or maybe we just don't want to commit the energy. We're busy people. We have a lot going on. Maybe we just don't have the energy to commit. If I told you that I was moving next weekend, I guarantee you most of you would turn your programs over and start writing all the excuses as to why you can't help me move, right? It is so common for people to try to get out of helping their friends move that, believe it or not, I researched this, there is a website that's sole focus is to find valid reasons to help you get out of helping your friends move. And I'm going to give you the top 4, so you might want to write these down. By the way, I'm not moving next week. Here's your top 4 valid reasons for not helping your friend move. Number 4, it was arm day at the gym yesterday, and my arms are too sore to lift any big boxes. Look at this. Check these pythons out. I am totally using that one. Number 3, I need to wait at home for the repairman to fix my TV in our guest room. Now, I think universally I can say we all hate Comcast, but they do give us some great excuses for not helping people move. Number 2, and my favorite, thinking about moving reminds me of my traumatic moving experience as a kid, so my therapist doesn't think it's a good idea for me to help. I'm not going to be writing notes for you guys, by the way. Number 1, here we go. I always loved all your furniture and stuff, so I know if I'm helping you move all of it, it will make me resent you even more. It's flattering, isn't it? But yet you're still not helping them out. I think that one's a good one. But no matter why we don't show up, the truth is it's just uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. It's something we're not used to doing. Well, here's your bullet point for this one. Uncomfortable keeps us away, but compassion should draw us near. Uncomfortable keeps us away, but compassion should draw us near. Jesus' compassion drew him to Mary and Martha, in spite of the dangers that it posed. So what do you do when you show up, especially if you don't know what to do? Well, here's your next bullet point. Don't feel you need to speak. Don't feel you need to speak. If you don't know what to say, ask God for the words. Ask God for the words. If nothing comes, then just listen. It is absolutely okay for you just to be present in that moment with someone. They are not looking to you to fix them. Matter of fact, they're probably going to get offended if you try. They just need you to be there, and that's okay. Brings us to principle 3. Principle number 3, sympathy looks down on the situation, while empathy lifts it up to God. Sympathy looks down on the situation. It takes a judgy form. And I don't know that judgy is a word, but it really should be. So I'm going to try and get that one added for 2018. But empathy lifts up the situation to God. We put our trust in God. So Jesus tells the disciples in this story, hey guys, I think we have to go back and help Mary and Martha out. And they think this is a terrible idea. They think this is crazy. We're actually gaining ground here. People are believing. They want to hear about you. Why would we leave this flock that is growing daily for these few people over here? And it's dangerous. Is it really worth it? They're looking down and they're judging the situation. But Jesus reminds them that they should be trusting in God. He is encouraging and reminding them that walking a good and righteous path is all they need. This is John chapter 11, verse 9 and 10. Guess what page we're on? 749. You got it. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It's when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have not light. So Jesus insists that there are 12 hours in a day, but he's not talking about the daylight. That's not what's going to get him through the situation. He's talking about that good and righteous walk with God. If we are doing the right thing, we have to trust that God will be with us. That somehow we will be lifted up for that person in that moment. Now, as Christ followers, I'm sort of ashamed to say that sympathy sometimes takes a very judgy tone. We not only look down on the person, but we can look down on the situation. So I did some research. I know you're shocked. These are common things that we say, but never should because it's considered judgy. Common things we say, but never ever should because it's judgy. And I'll explain why it's judgy in a minute, but these are the ones you want to strike from your brain. First one, everything happens for a reason. It's all part of God's plan. Just think positive thoughts. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I know some of you are probably thinking, oh, those are my go-tos. Those are great. We use those all the time. How can they possibly be judgy? And they are judgy because they imply that in that moment, in that chaos, that depression, that terrible time, that the problem is somehow not the problem. That the problem is the way that the person's reacting to that terrible problem. And that's just not true. In that chaos, in that state, the problem is absolutely the problem. It just is. Sometimes we do even worse things. And I'm ashamed to say it. We blame the person for the terrible things that fall upon them. We will say things like, they had to know that was going to turn out badly. Or if we don't like them, we'll say something like, well, it serves them right. Or maybe we say, you knew it was going to catch up to them sometime. But the truth is, no one steps into a bad situation and thinks it's going to end up badly. We think we're the exception. We got this. We can get through it. It's not going to end badly. I've done it before. It's fine. And honestly, when we look at the example Jesus provided for us, he was not judgy. He didn't look to Lazarus and say, oh, Lazarus, I told him not to drink from that cistern. He should have drank bottled water. It was going to get him. Or he must have been preparing raw chicken again. That E. coli is going to get you every time. But that is not what Jesus did. It's not what he did. Here's our first bullet point. When you are looking down on someone, you are unable to share their perspective. You can't share their perspective. In order to make that connection, you need to share their perspective. If you're showing up, you are sharing their perspective. It's uncomfortable, but we have to trust that our good and righteous path will be guarded by God. Here's principle number 4. Sympathy dusts off pain. Sympathy dusts off pain, while empathy shares pain. So in the story of Lazarus, remember that Jesus is now going back to a town of Judea, or Bethany in Judea. He's not welcome. He nearly escaped with his life last time he was there. Meanwhile, Mary and Martha are in their home, and they're sitting what's called Shiva. Shiva is a Jewish custom that after you bury someone, the immediate family will descend on the house and they will mourn for 7 days. For 7 days they will mourn. During this time, extended family will come through, friends, co-workers, community people. So they have an entire house full of Jewish people who want nothing to do with Jesus. They don't believe him. He's bad. They don't want to see him. So Mary hears that Jesus is coming, and she goes out to meet Jesus. She says, Jesus, thanks for coming. I'm so sorry, but Lazarus has already passed away. But Jesus doesn't want to hear it. He sends her back to go get Martha. So Mary goes back to go get Martha and bends down and says, hey, Martha, Jesus is out there. He wants to talk to you. She jumps up, goes to Jesus. Now, everyone there thinks she's going to the tomb to mourn. So they jump up with her, and they go to Jesus. So here's Jesus. Mary and Martha show up, and they are absolutely broken. Remember, they just lost their brother. And the one person in the world that could have prevented that showed up late. So they are losing him all over again. All over again. They are broken. There are many mourners that are crying. And the scriptures describe Jesus' response as deeply moved in spirit, troubled. Jesus wept. He shared that pain. Let's take a look at John chapter 11. This is verse 33 to 35, and then we're going to skip down to verse 38. So there's 33 to 35, we're going to skip to 38. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews that had come along with her, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Verse 38, Jesus once more deeply moved came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Now, I know, I did some research on the Greek word used for troubled, and it is interpreted as weakened by emotion, weakened by emotion. So I want you to think about what Jesus would have looked like. Now, what you may not know is over 60% of people, over 60% are visual learners. So I have a scale for you that will give you an idea of what Jesus would have looked like when he saw the pain of all these people. So here you go. Here's sad. Now, sad, this person is weakened, tired. They don't have the energy to smile. And then as you move closer to deeply moved, you'll see tears start to form, maybe this involuntary contraction of the face. But by the time you get to deeply moved, you are ugly crying right there. Your face is contorted. You are bright red. Tears are streaming. Snot's running down. It's awful. You are weakened by emotion. So this uncomfortable place, this vulnerable place is where Jesus went. That's where he went. When he saw the people he loved hurting, he shared that pain. Now, what you may not realize, millennials were actually raised in a digital age, so they actually don't recognize facial features the same way we do. So millennials, for you guys, I have a scale for you. There you go. Does that make more sense? Yeah, I thought so. I researched it. It's on the internet. It's got to be true, right? Totally works. The truth is, pain is pain. We don't necessarily have to feel that same pain as somebody to understand pain. Jesus didn't necessarily understand the pain of Mary and Martha or the mourners, but he had experienced pain in his life for sure. He connected with that pain, and he wore it. He allowed himself to be vulnerable to it. Here's your bullet point for this one. Imagine the other person's perspective. Imagine the other person's perspective and identify the feelings. Then allow these two things to impact your heart. You don't need to feel the same pain, but allow it to impact your heart. That brings us to our very last principle. Sympathy scratches the surface while empathy massages the soul. Sympathy scratches the surface, empathy massages the soul. The idea is that empathy makes a lasting impression on people. Makes a lasting impression. They will remember you and the good things that you did for them. So in our story, we know the story of Lazarus. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And many of the Jewish people that were there who previously stoned him and kicked him out now became believers. But what I want to point out is that it's not necessarily about the miracle. And I'll explain that to you after the passage. We're going to look at John chapter 11, verse 39 to 45. John chapter 11, verse 39 to 45. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. His hands and feet were wrapped in strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Therefore, many of the Jews that had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. Now I say it's not about the miracle because remember that he had just come from this place where they had tried to stone him and kill him and kicked him out. He was performing miracles then. And yet they still did not accept him. They were incredibly skeptical about miracle workers back then, and for very good reasons. There were two types of miracle workers back then. There were your healers who showed up into a village and would say, hi, I'm your local healer. I have some essential oils, tinctures. I can do a laying of the hands. Bring me your sick people, maybe some money, a goat, sheep, chicken. I'll take it. I'll take care of you. By the way, it takes 7 to 10 days to totally heal, but I'm out of here in 2. And they didn't go back. They didn't check in on their patients. And so a lot of people were taken. They paid for these miracles that never ever happened. Now, there was another kind of miracle worker that's kind of similar to our magicians today, like the great Houdini. And it's all about notoriety and fame. They would do these amazing feats for people, these miracles, and they would even claim that their powers came from God. And then at the end of their performance, they would send around a basket, and they'd ask you to donate money. Come on, give me money. The great Houdini, did you see that? Did you see what I did? Give me money. So when Jesus came around, and he healed people, and certainly, if you're the person who was healed, you would believe. But everybody else was skeptical for a good reason. But what made Jesus different was that he never asked for anything in return. Not fame, not money. Matter of fact, he gave all the credit to God. Yes, the Jewish people that day saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead. And no doubt they would be skeptical. But they also saw his empathetic response, his willingness to face death, to show up, and to share that depth of loss with the crowd, to be vulnerable to people. Those things together reflected God's image in the most perfect way. And that's what brought many people to Christ. Here's your bullet point. We have a chance to show the grace of God, to reflect God's image. It doesn't require miracles, although loving some people can be miraculous. But We have a chance to show the grace of God, to reflect God's image. We have a chance to massage their soul by caring and showing up. Caring and showing up. But acting empathetically is not just for the benefit of others. We need it as much as they do. Emily Kelly's going to come up today. She's one of our Point members, and she's going to be reading something called A Parable of the Spoons. You can come on up. That's going to highlight why it is we need empathy as much as other people do.
Hello. So this is Parable of the Spoons. One day a man said to God, "God, I would like to know what heaven and hell are like." God showed the man 2 doors. Inside the first one, in the middle of the room, was a large round table with a large pot of stew. It smelled delicious and made the man's mouth water. But the people sitting around the table were thin and sickly. They appeared to be famished. They were holding spoons with very long handles, and each found it possible to reach into the pot of stew and take a spoonful. But because the handle was longer than their arms, they could not get the spoons back into their mouth. The man shuddered at the sight of their misery and suffering. God said, "You have seen hell." Behind the second door, the room appeared exactly the same. There was a large round table with a large pot of wonderful stew that made the man's mouth water. The people had the same long-handled spoons, but they were well-nourished and plump, laughing and talking. The man said, "I don't understand." God smiled. "It is simple," he said. "It only requires one skill. These people learn to feed one another."
They learn to feed one another. They learn to take care of each other. Truth is, if you're not hungry now, you will be. We all need to eat, all of us. And you better hope you have some connections with people who own some long spoons. Now, I know it's the new year and we're all making resolutions, right? Everybody, how many of you guys actually do have resolutions? Resolution maker? Try? Yeah. Well, I want you to consider doing a new resolution. Consider about going on a diet. But you're not going to lose anything, you'll gain everything from this diet. Here's your simple truth for today. Start your sympathy diet for the new year by trading your virtual relationships for deep connections and emulating the empathetic nature of Jesus. Trade your virtual virtual relationships for deep connections, meaningful connections. Because that's what Jesus showed us we're supposed to do. Love God, love one another. And he shows us how we're supposed to love one another. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for all the souls in this room today. I thank you